Practitioners of regenerative agriculture, and especially advocates of cover cropping, laud the mighty Daikon radish. It's also called the sodbuster radish. It's a great cover crop that produces some biomass, scavenges bunches of nitrogen, and it has a radish root that supposedly breaks through deep compacted soil. I'm Rob from Dowdle Family Farms, and I grow Daikon radishes, as you can see, but I'm not quite sure that it's everything that it's cracked up to be in my context. My first exposure to Daikon radish occurred over a decade ago before I came back to the farm. Terry Tucker in Georgia grew them on the edge of a pecan orchard and cotton field, and he preached about how the deer absolutely love them. Since then, I've heard a lot of people that grow them for wildlife, especially deer. They love both the greens and the actual tubers. For many people in more northern areas, it easily winter kills at about 25 degrees for a couple days. We rarely get that kind of weather, and so normally it does not winter kill in my area. When planted with a drill in row crop farming, it can leave a series of holes as it dies, and it makes it easier for the following crops to get planted, and it has those root structures that as they decay helps the roots of the newly planted plants to grow quicker as well. It's often used as a biological tillage instrument. And indeed, the size of the tubers can be incredibly large. They can reach lengths of 8 to 12 or even 14 inches. At the end of that long, thick tuber, there's a taproot that can help bust through hard pan soils as well. In fact, Daikon radishes are often called biotil radishes or tillage radishes. It's great at capturing excessive nutrients like nitrogen that easily leach out of the soil during winter rains. They're absorbed in the tissues of the plant, and as the plant decomposes rapidly in the spring as the soil warms, it releases those nutrients for the following crops. I've wondered if Daikon radish helps earthworm populations. I've read some field notes from universities doing research, and they found a lot of earthworm channels, cocoons, eggs, and the channels left by the decomposed roots from the Daikon radish. So it makes me wonder if Daikon radish attracts more earthworms than do most other cover crops. I usually plant Daikon radish around the first part of August with purple top turnips, cereal rye, winter peas, clovers, and a handful of other crops. The tuber growth seems to be the best as the day lengths are shortening. So in my area in Mississippi, if I plant it in the fall, I'll get some good tuber growth. If I plant it in the spring, it usually just bolts and goes on to seed. So I don't plant it in March or April. What I found is Daikon radish works as a pretty decent fall and winter forage crop for my pigs. Because of that, I try to plant it in early August. And so what I've found is that I can actually broadcast the seed in some sorghum sudan grass or hybrid pearl millet. After I broadcast the Daikon radish and other cool season cover crops, I'll then flail mow the sorghum sudan grass. If the sorghum sudan grass is only about 12 inches tall, once it's mown, it offers a little bit of a mulch, but not too much of a mulch. It shades the soil, it holds the moisture, and cools the soil so that those cool season cover crops can grow. Then, as the sorghum sudan grass regrows, it'll shade the soil and the seedlings of those cool season cover crops in August when it's still hot. Once the frost comes, it kills the warm season cover crops, and then the cool season cover crops are able to take advantage of all the additional light, soil moisture, and soil nutrients left by the warm season cover crops. So at a very specific time of the year, I like growing Daikon radishes for their forage production, but sometimes I wonder if the value of Daikon radish as a cover crop gets more attention than it should. Most of the time, people talk about Daikon radishes and their use as a cover crop in more of a row crop farming context. And I'm in a very, very different context. While I want to improve my soil health, I also want to be able to produce a large amount of forage with the cover crops that I grow. Now, Daikon radishes do provide good, nutritious forage, and they're better forages than some of the purple top turnips and other crops that I've grown sometimes. But Daikon radish is not just the super productive forage crop that some of the other cover crops that we can grow are. So people really love to talk about the root growth and how it's a tillage radish, and I understand that I am probably very wrong on this point. but I think people see the big tubers produced by the daikons and talk about it busting up the hard pan. And sometimes we've gotten 12-inch tubers, and I've seen 18-inch tubers on other people's farm. But most of the time, 1/3 to up to half of the tuber growth is above the ground. Now, they have some smaller roots as well, and those smaller roots help the daikon radish absorb excessive soil nutrients. And it does have a taproot that can penetrate deeper into the soil profile as well. But it seems to me we tend to get much shorter big tubers that are growing, and I suspect that it's in large part because of our acidic soil that we have on our farm. Because we've grown cover crops on a large part of our farm, we tend to have a good bit of organic matter on parts of our farm in the top few inches of soil. That helps buffer some of the soil acidity, and when we have more acidic sublayers of soil, once we get down to 18 to 20 inches deep, I just don't see that the daikon radish roots really dig down that deep. You can see that as I dig up these daikon radishes here in this video, we just don't have quite as much depth in there as I would have expected. I have read a couple articles on daikon radishes do not do very well in acidic sublayers of soil. That may be anecdotal. I haven't confirmed that just yet. When I compare daikon radish to sorghum Sudan grass, it pales in comparison to the effectiveness of sorghum Sudan grass in terms of how it breaks up compacted soils. Sorghum Sudan grass has many more roots. It's denser. It puts on a lot more biomass, and it just improves the soil so much better than the daikons do. One reason that I'm not as big of a fan of daikon radish all the time is that it's a pretty expensive crop to grow on a per acre basis. A 50-pound bag of daikon radish seed is about $80 to $100 locally for me, and it covers about 4 to 5 acres. They recommend planting it in a pure stand of 10 to 15 pounds per acre. That's a cost of about $20 to $25 per acre for a pure stand of the seed. Purple top turnips, on the other hand, are $80 for a 50-pound bag, and you plant it at 2 to 5 pounds per acre. And so that's $4 to $10 per acre to actually plant. Dwarf Essex rape is about $50 for a 50-pound bag. You plant it at 2 to 5 pounds per acre. Pigs love Dwarf Essex rape more than any of the other brassicas that I've grown so far. And so that means that the cost is $2 to $5 per acre for the Dwarf Essex rape. So while the $20 to $25 per acre is a cheap price for many people, especially those who are trying to capture excessive nutrients in the soil. But just in my context, I found other crops to be much more effective. Some things like clovers, Austrian winter peas, cereal rye, and a few others are really great crops for me to grow. The problem that I find with these crops, though, is that they have their best growth in the spring. So for me, where daikon radish fits into that really good profile of cover crops is when I plant a few paddocks of it in August, and then I can graze it in November, December, January time frame, get a good bit of forage value out of it, and it works really well. Now, I also think it's great to add to a mix of other cover crops, so I'll add a pound or two per acre in my other cover crop mixes. I just don't plant as much of it as a lot of other people do. One thing you'll notice, though, daikon radish seed, even though it is coated, if you look at this picture here, you can see where I passed over it with the broadcast spreader. I've got some areas of daikon radish, and the grain seed, the cereal rye, and others spread much wider. So is the daikon radish for you? If you're primarily interested in growing forage crops for livestock, you may want to put a little bit into your mix, but I'm not convinced that it's everything that it's cracked up to be. It costs a little bit more, and in my context, I just don't see it doing a whole lot of good breaking up the hard clay soils. There are other cover crops that seem to do that much more effectively. Despite its cost and its weaknesses, I still put a little bit in my mixes.